doing a great job with that so far. And we look forward to hearing your comments in the chat because we love hearing from you guys. And I think it makes for a really rich interactive experience. So go on to the next slide, please. So we're going to start with some introductions. Please go ahead and oh, it's Wi-Fi isn't strong enough for video. I totally understand. So please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We want to know who's here, so feel free to put your name and the organization that you're with in the chat because we want to hear from you so we can connect with you. And then also, please tell us what you're hoping to learn or gain from your participation today. Our presenters today are going to be Skylar Bellinger and Melissa Maris. I'm Lenny Swales. I'm a psychologist at KU Med. You probably saw me at the first couple of Echo sessions. Getting lots of great responses in the chat. Looks like we've got people from Carla from Grandview, Gabrielle from Pawnee Mental Health, school social workers abound. Lots of great folks. Thank you so much for putting in who you are and where you're with in the box today. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So just like previous sessions, we're going to start off with a quick introduction before we pretty quickly move into our didactic presentation. And then we'll have some time to do a case presentation, some group discussion where we can all ask some questions and hopefully provide some recommendations to our case presentation team. Just want to do a little plug. We do still have opportunities for one more group to do the case presentation. We'd love to get some volunteers for our next session. I hope it's been a helpful experience for the people who have volunteered to do it so far. And I also hope that it's a helpful experience for you all to have a case to discuss. So let us know if we can support you in any way with that, and we'll send out the link to sign up for that again at the end of this presentation today. And a reminder, whenever you see this box in the side, we want to hear from you. So we know that some of these skills might be things that could be familiar to you, and you guys have a wealth of information from your lived experience with using some of these strategies. So we want to hear from you ways you've applied it so we can learn from you, and so also your colleagues can learn from each other. And it looks like Alice went ahead and put the case presentation link in the chat box, so go ahead and use that if you want to sign up for the last case presentation in December. So go ahead and next slide, please. And a reminder, after the last session, we're going to send you a post-training survey. Next slide. And like I said, that last presentation will be on December 16th. Next slide. Just like all of the echoes that we do, this information is based on the current evidence that's accepted within the profession, and we trust you guys all to know how best to integrate that into your practice. Next slide. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenting team for today. Today we'll be talking about routine and social engagement.
Wonderful, thanks, Lenny. Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Maris, and I work with the Telehealth Rocks crew. I am a clinical community psychologist. I'm actually based out of Columbia, Missouri, but consults with school districts in Missouri and Kansas, and also professional organizations, state agencies. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you all about building routines and promoting social engagement. And it does feel a little bit ironic to be talking about routines when things are changing so much all the time. I know that Skylar and I were talking briefly just before we started about lots of shifts in terms of how school is being done and all of the uncertainty. And so we're excited to talk to you about some things that we can do potentially to support young people and also ourselves during what is absolutely a very challenging time. If we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of things that we are hoping to cover today, we wanted to talk a little bit about this new normal we're in, and particularly kind of the brain science behind what is happening for most of us or all of us right now. Talk a little bit about how we can take care of ourselves and ask for help, and then talk about routines. So how we can try to build routines into the work we do and help others build routines. Again, to try to address some of that uncertainty and the cognitive load that is now just part of our new normal. I did want to point out that we are pulling some of our content today from a great recent resource that was put out from the National Center for Traumatic Stress And it's linked in over here. So supporting children and teens during the holiday season. We're going to try to post in the chat some of the resources that we're referencing throughout the presentation. They're also linked in the presentation, which we will send out after today with the recording in the chat. But wanted to just give them credit for what they have done. Next slide, please. So in terms of our new normal, so back in March, everything sort of turned upside down, and that's not where we are now. 9 months later, our new normal looks very different, even if that new normal is shifting all of the time. And I find it really helpful, even though this is our lived experience, and so it's something that we all understand very much because it's what we're dealing with every day, to kind of stop and pause and talk about the brain science behind it. And so I found this really great article, the brain science of attention and overwhelm, that walks through. This is a group out of Florida that actually looks at and does research all the time on this issue of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So actually looking at brains and what happens in these kinds of contexts. And so typically they do research with first responders, folks in the military, so people who are in situations often where there's this constant sort of stress happening. And one thing that they've done is to pivot to look at how they can help us better understand what's going on in our brains right now, because all of us now are in that situation where there's a lot of volatility. It's very complex, it's not always clear, and things are uncertain. And so the research that they have done suggests, and other research suggests, that this kind of context that we are all living through, this new normal, really is affecting our cognitive capacities. So there's a lot out there about Zoom fatigue, but just in general that this constant pull for our attention in different ways really has created some chronic sort of cognitive challenges. And one of the things that they really focus on is the role of attention specifically, and how these kinds of conditions really degrade our attention and the functions that attention has and how we go about our day-to-day business. So it's important to recognize that attention shapes our reality. They describe it as a flashlight that shines on certain things. And so kind of what our ability to pay attention to the right things in the right way really matters in terms of how we function. Attention is also vulnerable and volatile. So attention is shaped by stress and our feelings. It's shaped by things that are happening around us. It's shaped by past experiences. So attention really fluctuates a lot depending on what's going on around us. But the good news is that attention can be managed. So there are strategies that we can put in place to try to manage attention, and therefore try to really address some of these cognitive challenges that we're all experiencing. But I talk about this because I think it's important for us to recognize, not just in ourselves, but the people that we work with, adults and young people, that at this point, 9 months into this pandemic, under these conditions, we should just assume widespread executive function deficits. All of us have probably worked with or struggle ourselves with executive function challenges. But really, given the context that we're all functioning in now, this new normal, we just need to walk into situations and interactions assuming that everybody's not really, firing on all the cylinders, right? And that means that impacts focus, it impacts our attention span, it impacts our ability to persevere on tasks. It absolutely impacts memory. So what we are remembering, what we can remember, and then therefore it just generally impacts behavior and functioning overall. So the ability for our brains to kind of, exist and work the way that they typically do has been impacted. And so that therefore impacts everything. We've tried to talk in these webinars about the science of brains, and I think this has been a really powerful tool in the work that I've done with schools and other youth supporting organizations around just understanding where behaviors and feelings come from. When we can try to understand our brains and we have that knowledge, I think it really empowers us. But I think then it's also important for us to remember this, not just for ourselves, but also share this information with others. And then, of course, I think we should be anticipating that this has absolutely been exacerbated by the election and other kinds of issues, what's going on in the news daily, but also the upcoming holiday season. So I think anybody who has worked in schools or with schools appreciates that the holidays are often a challenging time in this context because things become so unpredictable, because there's long spans of time away from school. And so all of that unpredictability is, again, going to impact the way that our brains really function. Next slide, please. So in terms of coping right now, I wanted to talk a little bit of mindfulness and really specifically around this issue of how the current context is impacting the way that our brain is functioning. We talk a lot about mindfulness in all sorts of different contexts, but I do find it helpful to reframe mindfulness as a cognitive strategy, to think about mindfulness as a neurological intervention, to equate the way that our brain is working and our feelings with physical health, right? To use words like brain and neuroscience. I think that helps people understand and appreciate or perhaps reframe the way that they think about something like mindfulness. This isn't yoga necessarily. This isn't, quiet walks on the beach, even though that sounds lovely. Mindfulness really is something that we need to be able to do at a basic level to function and for our brains to function at this point. So mindfulness really at its base just means being present, aware, and regulated. I linked a good basic article on mindfulness that has these really, really sort of pared down steps. If you have someone who is interested in mindfulness, kind of wants to know the very basics of it. But I think the trick here is to talk about mindfulness in a way and to think about mindfulness for ourselves, people we work with, in a way that's really accessible. Mindfulness does not have to be a heavy lift. Mindfulness absolutely can be something that we practice. It can be linked to behaviors that we build over time. And so I've really found some success in trying to find opportunities to multitask mindfulness. So using it as a tool to do your job. So when I work with educators in the classroom, I talk about ways that they can incorporate mindfulness into what they're doing with their students. But the trick here is that it actually helps them too. So finding ways to incorporate mindfulness is just a regular part of something that you do for your job. Practicing with other people is really, really helpful. We also know that behavior change is more successful if we pair it with something else we do regularly. So if you have a behavior that you do regularly, maybe you fill up your water cup every hour, something that you already do, if you can pair a new behavior with that, you're more likely to stick with it and it's more likely to be successful. And really this idea to sort of leaning into zoning out. So a lot of us zone out doing different kinds of things, but part of it is recognizing that's your brain's cue that it needs a minute to sort of regroup. So recognizing when that's happening and trying to do that on purpose. And also practicing what we preach. So I think everyone probably on this call has heard about mindfulness, has probably talked to other people about mindfulness, has maybe advised mindfulness, but we also need to make sure that we're doing this for ourselves. So think about someone that you have talked with or worked with and what has been successful with your work with them or those conversations, and then use those strategies for yourself. Or apply those strategies to different audiences. So if you have something that you have done maybe with young people that's been successful, think about ways that that could be elaborated or adapted to work with teachers in a school. At its base, these mindfulness strategies can be applied across different audiences in all kinds of different ways or adapted for different formats. And I put a couple of just really quick examples here. Again, the idea being to make mindfulness really accessible. So this doesn't have to be difficult. It's not a heavy lift, but to find these little ways to incorporate mindfulness into our everyday routines and to help other people do the same. Again, this is a cognitive strategy. This is something that we're doing to help our brains function. And so all of us, I know this happens to me, that I find that I'm more forgetful. I find that it's harder for me to pay attention to certain things for long periods of time. So if we're seeing these now cognitive impacts, these cognitive deficits, mindfulness has been shown by research to be effective. So incorporating this can kind of combat some of that, that cognitive load and the impact. Next slide, please. It's also helpful when we're thinking about sort of coping right now in this current context and then in the new normal, to make sure that we're continuing to talk about it and talking about it regularly. We know from the research that changing our behaviors and really getting people to talk about feelings and mental health on a regular basis isn't just going to happen magically. We need to build this into routines. And so I have some morning check-in links over here, some, the mood meter out of the lab out of Yale. But really the trick here is to incorporate this into something that happens every day. So I think I maybe gave an example a couple sessions ago about administrators I've worked with that have something like the mood meter or a check-in sort of printout on their desks. And back when we were doing all face-to-face, every person who came into their office needed to check in with their feeling. Everybody. So a teacher, a board member, a parent, a student. And again, it just becomes part of something that we do. We need to ask about feelings to validate, use it as a connection point, and then being clear about saying what you know and what you don't know, and acknowledging the uncertainty and doing what you can. And Mark Brackett, who does the mood meter work out of Yale, had a great post on Twitter. This was a couple weeks ago, looking at research with young people where they were talking about how relieving it is to have that space and knowing that they're going to have that space to talk about their feelings, that actually gives space for that to be. And so then they don't have to worry about it. Again, part of the benefit of having routines and these sorts of schedules that we can anticipate and predict and follow is that it leaves more of our brain to think about other things. And so that it can feel good to know, okay, this is my feeling, and I know that my teacher or my social worker is going to ask me about it later. That actually creates some feelings of relief for people. Next slide, please. And then finally, just wanted to talk about a little bit more around self-care, but again, this strategy of trying to multitask self-care. And I don't know how many of you all have heard about, or if we talked about this How Right Now campaign, but I really like what they've done with this. And so you can see all the links here, but if you go to How Right Now, if you just Google How Right Now, what pops up is actually this blue screen that's down at the bottom right. And it sort of walks through how are you feeling? You say how you're feeling, and then it links to ideas. What I really like about this site is, one, it's very user-friendly, it's very easy, but it's also applicable across all sorts of different populations. So it's not geared specifically for veterans or for youth. It's really something that's accessible to a broad audience. It also will eventually link people who are using it to further resources if they need additional support. So if I'm coming to a site like this and I'm really having a hard time, and I say that I'm sad, and then I continue saying that I'm sad, then eventually the site will lead me to suggest perhaps calling the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline or other resources. It links to domestic violence resources. There's specific things to link, members of our elderly population to other resources, but it kind of walks people through this in a way that's really easy. The How Right Now folks have put together a really, really slick toolkit that is really easy to use. So if you are engaged in any way on, on social media with your organization, they have a bunch of stuff that is really and truly plug and play to just pop into things. But this idea, How Right Now, it's really easy to go on there and to kind of walk through that. And again, the more that we can multitask these kinds of tools so that it's good for us, but it's also good for other people, and we can be sharing it with lots of different members of our community, the more regularly we're going to practice using these kinds of things, and then it becomes part of those routines. So I think with that, I'm going to hand this over to Skylar to talk a little bit more about routines.
All right, thanks, Melissa. All right, next slide, Anita, please. Well, I'm Skylar Bollinger. I'm a psychologist here at the University of Kansas Medical Center and part of the Telehealth Rocks team. I am really excited to be talking about healthy routines today. It is a really a big area of interest and passion for me. I think it can make such a big difference. I also think it's really ironic that we're talking about it today. I know there's just been a lot of changes around the state very, very quickly. And so we're all just adapting. I know that it feels like we've finally gotten into like a routine, and then it's all going to change again. So as important as these are, we also are giving lots of grace that we understand that this is not as easy as it sounds right now, but thinking about ways that even if the exact routine isn't the same, how can we make some kind of consistency to make kind of free up that brain space and make everybody feel a little bit less anxious. So even if it's not the same routine at the same place every day, it's at least the same routine of the same important pieces of our day every day. And how can we incorporate that into our schedules and to our students and our kids' schedules? So as Melissa mentioned already, you know, that when our brain is being used for so much right now. And so if we have a routine, if we have something we can expect, that really protects brain space. We don't have to worry about what's coming next, right? We can kind of know what's coming next, which that protects that brain space from having to worry about what's next to use it for something else, which we all know we need a little bit extra brain space right now. So if we can build healthy routines for ourselves and our students, that's just going to make free up more space and power for other things. We also know that predictability decreases anxiety. And right now we don't have a lot of predictability in a lot of our world. And so how do we make it, again, in a way that it may not be perfectly predictable as I'm going to be here, I'm going to be here, I'm going to be able to go here. But still, I'm always going to do these certain things, right? Like I think that Jamie said something about, I'm always going to do this check-in, right? Or this mindfulness thing, or I'm always going to do something healthy, exercise for my body or outside. And so we can talk a little bit about that in a little bit. So again, yeah, since everything's changing, it makes it so much more important. You know, even the external cues and the markers of the routine are changing, right? So if they're used to going to school and they always know that we're going to switch to lunch because of the bell or because of, you know, something that the teacher says, or that they hear, you know, talking outside in the cafeteria, all those cues that we're used to that help us know, okay, this is what's coming next, right? Okay, I know that this is coming now. Those are going to be different, right? And those might be changing quickly. So we might need to really be kind of revisit those routines and not just assume that kids know when lunch is now that they're learning remotely, right? Like we might have to make that really concrete or really visual, or even talking about what is that going to look like today? What is that going to sound like today? What's that going to feel like today? Are we going to have another cue that's going to let us know when lunch is, or when check-in is, or when math is, or when social time is? And really kind of, you might have to back up and reteach those routines and give them other ways that they can kind of know what to expect, since we know that a lot of those things are changing and what they're used to as triggers may not be helping them know what's next. Visual schedules, I can never plug them enough. I feel like you can solve so much with a visual. So we'll talk about creating those in a little bit. But making those routines should be concrete and visual. If you can see it in front of your face, it's not stressful, right? You're not worried about when is this going to happen? What's going to happen next? Because I can see it. So again, that frees up all that mind space that I'm thinking, when am I going to get to go to lunch? When am I going to get to work on this? I see it right in front of me and I don't have to stress about it anymore. And then again, yeah, don't assume that kids are going to figure anything out or intuit anything, right? Everything's changing. And so we can't just assume that they're going to know that their schedule is the same now, that they're learning remotely as it was when they were at school. We have to reteach that and make that part of our routine now. All right. And then thinking about, you know, always incorporating praise and motivation into that routine. You can just do that naturally. So always using those sort of ideas of when and then. So when you get your math done, then you get some free time, right? So always putting those preferred activities right after those non-preferred activities so that you can make that healthy routine much easier and it kind of flows a little bit better and more motivating for kiddos. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just an example kind of, again, things that we all know that we probably should be doing as part of our daily routines, but it's always a good reminder. And I think it's a good reminder to revisit with your students, with your families, you know, to just always have enough sleep incorporated, exercise, and thinking about how we can be creative with that now that it's colder, right, outside. And so maybe it's inside dance parties or yoga videos or just ways we can incorporate that. Healthy nutrition, you know, building in time for play and fun, right? That's totally acceptable and important to keep us healthy. And building in those times for work and learning and alternating that, you know, it's a work time, now it's a play time. Building in those times for chores and helping around the house, we're going to talk about in a minute, but just that feeling of being productive and contributing and being helpful can be really healthy for kids, especially now when they feel so out of control, that we can give them some way to feel in control with some kind of helpful contribution to the household or to the classroom or something like that. Incorporating time for relaxation, and incorporating time for screens, right? We all know that these days we're using a lot of those, and that's totally okay. That can definitely be part of your routine. Just make it part of the routine, not the default, right? Okay, next slide. One thing I don't know that we always talk about enough as part of a healthy routine, and this was really highlighted in that National Children's Center for Trauma Network resource that Melissa mentioned earlier, but is, a big piece of your routine should include social connection, right? And especially in this day and age when our ability and our means for connecting socially are limited, right? So we're going to have to be really thoughtful and deliberate about incorporating that social connection into our routine. And we are focusing a little bit on the holidays just because we feel like, again, as Melissa said, we're adding like a stressor on top of a stressor on top of a stressor. And so, how can we help students and families and everyone get through this a little bit easier? So especially during the holidays, that's a time where people really count action. That's a big piece of their world during the holidays. So how can we deliberately build that in so that our kids and our families are feeling connected? So thinking about really how you can reimagine those traditions and still maintain that social connection safely. So Zoom sing-alongs, virtual holiday services, virtual read alouds. I know my son's school is doing, like, the principal is going to read a book out loud to everybody, and they're going to send popcorn home with everybody so they can eat popcorn and listen to the book. And so just thinking about, we can't have a normal holiday, performance, but how can we do something that is still helping everybody feel connected, right? So if you guys have other ideas, I think Lenny just mentioned that, just, throw in some ideas about ways that we can help with those connections. Looking at lights, I was thinking, doesn't really need any kind of that's pretty safe that way if you're just driving or walking. I know there's some great holiday trivia. We actually downloaded Kahoot, and I paid for the service for the app, and over Thanksgiving, and it was so much fun. They had all kinds of trivia that was already created for Thanksgiving trivia and trivia for kids. And so just thinking about ways that you can do that sort of thing. I was trying to think of Safe Secret Santa, thing like that you could do to still feel connected. All right, next slide. All right, and then again, because we know healthy routines include social connection, and a big piece of that is helping others, feeling like you're contributing, right? One of my favorite quotes is, "Those who spread sunshine on the lives of others cannot keep it from themselves," right? So we always feel better when we're doing something for other people. So how can we do that in a time that it feels hard to do that right now? But thinking about how to check in on older family members in safe ways, delivering meals, wrapping or donating toys, shoveling a neighbor's driveway, making or sending cards, virtually connecting with nursing homes. I love the idea of kind of figuring out how can we have the students be connecting with other folks that might be feeling isolated as well. So if you guys want to chat in, if you have other ideas that you could incorporate social connections and helping others into school routines, is there a way that you could do that with helping other classmates or things like that? Okay, next slide. All right, so pivoting kind of to visuals and how to make these things concrete. Again, I can never say enough about the visual supports. We know that when things are presented visually, that really helps improve understanding and cooperation with kiddos. And we use them a lot for kids with developmental disabilities and autism spectrum disorders. But they work really for all kids, right? They help us all. So we know that for everyone, they provide structure and predictability. We can see what's coming. We can predict what's coming. It helps clarify things. It really helps with transitions, right? And changes in routines, because instead of it feeling like this was totally sprung on me and I'm not ready for this, they can see that, okay, this is what's coming next. I should be ready. I should be prepared for this, which makes those transitions, which can be really big triggers for behavior, and to be a little bit less stressful. And then obviously you can teach new skills. If you need to break things down, you can teach some of these new routines, maybe now that we're in a different setting, we're not at school anymore, we're remote, maybe we need a new visual that kind of shows kids exactly what they do when they sign in, right? And then when they share their screen, or whatever it is, maybe it needs to be very, very specific step-by-step information about what this new skill or this new type of learning is going to look like, if they haven't already done that last year or earlier in the year. Obviously it makes abstract concepts more concrete. And you can really build in reinforcement and rewards much easier. So instead of just keep saying, you're going to get to do this when you're done, it's like they can see it. They can see that it's coming next, which makes that much easier and much more motivating. And then depending on the level of your kiddo, you can use words, right? So that they can see their schedule that way, but you can also use pictures or symbols. For nonverbal kiddos or kids that can't read yet, pictures are great. Next slide. So again, I'm not going to repeat all of this, but just there's all these wonderful reasons to use visuals, really help with anxiety. They build independence. I think one of my favorite parts is that they don't have an attitude, right? And so when we tell kids, okay, it's time to be done, right? That you've been working on this a long time, then we're sort of putting all of our bias and our feelings and our emotions into it. Whereas if it's just on the visual, it's not me that said it. I don't have any emotion that I'm bringing to it. It's just what's next on the schedule, right? So that leaves a lot less room for that sort of sometimes that trigger or some of those negative interactions that you might not even realizing that it's coming across this way. And they're feeling like you're sort of taking control, and they don't have as much control. So when it's on their own schedule and they get to follow it, that really gives them more control in the situation. All right. And then visuals are transferable between environments and people. So again, perfect for when we're kind of going back between learning models. If we have a visual that, that works at school, we can also modify it to work at home. It can work both places and they can still have, then that's something that's the same, right? That's something that's consistent in their world, which can be really comforting. All right, next slide. Okay, so just again, a quick example. This would be kind of a more basic visual schedule, but these can be modified again for whatever level your student is, from nonverbal, preschool to high schoolers, right? They can make their own schedules, put their own kind of graphics or pictures, and kind of do it themselves at a higher level. So really, you can use a visual schedule for any routine. You can use it for all day, or just pick a few challenging times that would be really helpful to address. So if you're always having trouble with a certain time of day, a certain subject, always having trouble signing in, or always having trouble with the end of the day, kind of figuring out how can we make a visual for that specific time of day that's going to make it go easier. I always think that simple is better. We don't want paragraphs and paragraphs about what step we're doing each step. Just really a couple of words if you can, and a picture that kind of helps you see it. Again, always alternating preferred and non-preferred tasks. So always putting, like in this example, you do your schoolwork and then you get games on YouTube, right? So always kind of having that, okay, this is something I don't love to do, right? Like I don't love to go to the bathroom and, brush my teeth, but I love to eat breakfast. So I know that's coming next. And then always, making those fun activities and rewards visible. So if they have a favorite snack, throw that on there so they can know that they're excited that they get to have that soon. And then including kids in the process. So allowing them to kind of just choose what order they're going to do the activities in, allowing them to choose the pictures they want to use, or they could draw pictures for what's going to happen next. The more they feel included, the more control they're going to feel like they have, which is going to create, again, less stress, less anxiety, and then less behavior problems. Next. Okay, and then I just put a picture, a big December calendar here, because I was thinking like sort of a calendar is like the ultimate big picture visual support, right? And so if we, if sort of those daily routines are challenging, and I think with December and the holidays and everything that's going on, we're not going to know what to expect every day, right? So even just going through the calendar with kids of, what today is going to look like, what tomorrow we think is going to look like, when we're going to have some sort of social activity, maybe on the 18th or whatever, and kind of penciling those things in with the understanding that, things might be changing, but how can we sort of pencil in the things that we know we can sort of make sure happen, right? So if we have some sort of safe social gathering that should be able to happen regardless, and kind of penciling all of those things in. So I think, again, just thinking about, we all really use visual supports. We all use calendars and planners and things. And so how can we make those things more accessible for the students that we work with, so that will then help create routines and healthy routines and all those good things that we know that we need. So I think that might be all that I have. So there's some cool things going through the chat. I don't know if Lenny, you want to highlight any of those things, but I can't
Yeah, there's a
see
lot
past
of great ideas and things that are coming out of the chat. I feel like it's always a rich resource, but today there's been some really neat things in there. Dana had some great ideas from one of the teachers in her district, and I'm like trying to scroll back to find it. But they had created a schedule of kind of consistent sort of activities that they're doing each week that would be applicable whether online or in person. So like mindfulness Mondays and together Tuesdays, would you rather Wednesday, things that matter Thursday, and feel good Fridays. I love that because that feels like that would feel so relaxing to me as an adult and also to kids to kind of have those consistent landing points. Some other things that were really neat in the chat. One person was talking about how they kind of bookend their day with mindfulness activities of starting a gratitude journal in the morning and then reviewing it at night. Um, I love the way of kind of getting the morning, the evening, and started off right. Several people mentioned specific apps that are good for mindfulness activities, like the Calm app. And then there was also some really nice discussion about different holiday traditions that could be applicable during the pandemic. Sharon had a really sweet example of a student in her town who's doing some um, for her birthday using the money to buy presents for the nursing home and doing the same thing for Christmas. And it could be a great thing for classrooms to do. That reminded me as well that a lot of the kids we work with, they're brilliant and they've got great ideas. So we should also be asking them what they think would be helpful during this unusual season. Um, and then there was also some discussion about ways to apply visual supports to older kids. So one person talked about using memes as part of their visual supports to make it fun or applicable for older kids. Someone else talked about how school staff or administrators do this really well at their school too. So I think there's been a lot of great ideas here.
That sounds awesome. Thank you for that. Was a lovely summary too. But yeah, I was seeing things pop through and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to miss that. But thank you all for sharing. It sounds like you all have wonderful ideas on how to incorporate those healthy routines. I love that idea of, what can you do that's the same no matter where you are, right? So the Together Tuesday and Mindfulness Month, that's just really great. Again, because that just creates that consistency and something that they can expect, which then decreases all of the anxiety that's surrounding so much. Is, how can we make it as predictable and comforting as possible right now? And I love the idea of using memes for older kids. I think especially older kids, we kind of forget about them. And again, like we were saying, it's like, oh, they know what the routine is. But right now, I mean, Melissa did a lovely job explaining they don't, right? They're so confused and none of us have any of the brain space. And we know that older kids and teenagers, executive functioning is already not exactly where it needs to be yet. And so we shouldn't expect that they should just get it, right? We should help them too and provide the supports for them too, because we know that we're all struggling with that right now and they need that support as well. All right, well, I think that's all we have for our presentation. You want to pivot to the case presentation.
Do you want to go on to the next slide? So we'd love to hear from you guys if there was any key takeaways from today or how you might see yourself applying any of the strategies discussed either in the presentation or the awesome ideas that were offered in the chat box over the next week. And also if there was an idea that you were hoping to share with either a colleague or a parent. And while